disrupt German lines of supply, blow up trains, etc. Shortly after war ends, these same networks are then turned around against the Russians. The Americans came in the late 1940s with lots of money. They had the resources, they had the equipment, they could outdo MI6 in all areas.
We're going to send the men who can train them to fight that kind of war.
And we have these men, experts in this kind of guerrilla warfare?
You bet we have.
After the Second World War, Britain and the US established a secret network of stay-behind armies in over 15 European countries, including neutral Switzerland and Austria. They were managed by the local secret services in close cooperation with the CIA and MI6. In each country, the network had its own name: Gladio in Italy, SDRA-8 in Belgium, Oberallagenten in Germany. Gladio foot soldiers were recruited from a variety of sources.
It's not possible to stereotype the people that are involved in Gladio because they vary from country to country. The type of people also varies, depends on the terrain, maybe gamekeepers who are working in the mountains or the forests, skiers. Other places is clearly more urban-based.
And most of them were convinced that communism was a threat. So these are people on the right, sometimes on the extreme right. But we also had people, conservatives, Catholics, who just wanted to defend their country.
Men like Franco Bortolomeoli, a technician and keen parachutist from Bolzano in the far north of Italy.
In the early 60s, aged 19, I joined up for a parachuting course in the spirit of adventure. The president of the association approached me one day and said, "If our country was invaded by a foreign power, would you be prepared to do something?" And I immediately responded, "Yes." "Fine, you're accepted." I asked, "Accepted by who?" "The less you know, the better." Our function wasn't to stop the Red Army. We wouldn't have been capable of stopping anyone, but to assist the people who came to our aid to enter the occupied territory. When we trained, we were told that on a specific day at a specific hour, a plane would arrive and it would drop 1 or 2 teams of soldiers, English or Americans, special forces, who would have to take action. It was hypothesized that perhaps they would have to overrun a barracks belonging to the invaders.
All kinds of people were recruited to the paramilitary groups in a tradition established by the Allies in the years immediately after the Second World War. They took seriously the old adage that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even enlisting prominent Nazis to the anti-Soviet cause. One of them, the SS spy master Reinhard Gehlen, would become the founder of the first post-war German secret service, which would later oversee the country's stay-behind network. In the early years of the Cold War, no one did more than Gehlen to feed US fears of a growing Soviet menace. President Truman poured millions into a variety of covert operations and intelligence programs to counter the communist threat. America's National Security Act of 1947 provided the legal foundation for covert action and what was termed unorthodox warfare. The strategy was carefully outlined in the National Security Council Directive 10/2. It would greatly influence the way the American Secret Services operated.
NSC 10/2 says that all means must be used, including setting up secret armies, including manipulating the population with fear or propaganda, and that a lot of money must be poured into this.
The 1948 communist coup in Czechoslovakia, the Berlin blockade, and the outbreak of war in Korea did much to nurture American fears of a Soviet invasion in Europe. Suspicion spiraled on either side of the Iron Curtain. And behind the official face of NATO, the drive to organize and establish the secret stay-behind networks in Western Europe intensified. In the years after the Second World War, the communist parties in Western Europe made huge gains in popularity, Their relationship with their Soviet comrades was of great concern to the United States. At that time, Peter Sickle was head of the CIA office in Berlin.
You had a very strong Italian Communist Party, French Communist Party, so there was a sense of insecurity because we also knew that the Russians availed themselves of those communist parties for political action.
As the risk of a communist political victory increased, so the strategy of the stay-behind armies turned away from the threat of Soviet invasion towards the enemy within.
The most important document for a historian right now is dated June 1, 1959, and it's actually a document from the Italian Military Secret Service, and it says that Gladio was set up on the one hand to become active in case of a Soviet invasion, and on the other hand in case of sovvertimenti interni, which means domestic unrest. I mean, we know from the 50s on that the secret armies had the twofold task.
Some of the earliest evidence of the role of NATO's secret armies in domestic political subversion comes from a German scandal in the 1950s.
In 1952, we had a member of the German stay-behind network walking into the police station in Frankfurt and saying, "I am a member of a secret army. We are being trained by an American in how to kill people, how to leave no traces, how to hide in forest. We have arms, we have explosives, and we are actually secret."
Adenauer was incensed that things like that were being done by the Americans without his knowledge. And it was not that I objected to it being done, but I would have been somewhat more careful in my choice of people.
The man who walked into the police station in 1952 was Hans Otto. A former SS officer, he had grown alarmed by the direction his stay-behind unit was taking. His testimony led to the discovery of a secret training center deep in the Hessen woods in central Germany. But what came as the biggest shock to investigators was that the paramilitaries seemed to have been handed a sinister political mission.
They had lists of people whom they wanted to kill, respected members of the community. And we always wondered, assassinated in case of a Soviet invasion or assassinated in case of a domestic change of power. And at that point, everybody thought there would be a very thorough investigation of the German stay-behind.
But no such investigation followed. After some deft diplomacy between the US and Germany, the 100 alleged conspirators, all right-wing extremists, were released. The case was quickly closed and forgotten, until a new scandal hit the headlines 30 years later. Just one day after the Oktoberfest attack, the police discovered that the suspected bomber, Gundolf Köhler, who had died in the blast, was a member of the neo-Nazi paramilitary organization, Wehrsportsgruppe Hoffmann.
Gundolf Köhler was interested in weapons and explosives. He'd also been like that within the Wehrsportsgruppe Hoffmann. Immediately after the attack, the police searched his parents' house in Donaueschingen and found what they described as a bomb factory. But they only found chemicals suitable for homemade explosives. Yet it was discovered that high-grade military explosives had been used in the Munich attack. One has to ask oneself how he got hold of this kind of explosive.
In the days that followed the bombing, the police interrogated some of his comrades.
These people, during interrogation, said, "We had our weapons and the explosives from another right-wing extremist, and his name is Heinz Lemke." And the funny thing is, this was never investigated.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Das Ausmaß der von Rechtsextremisten angelegten Waffen.
In 1981, a year after the Oktoberfest bomb, hikers stumbled upon a huge arms cache deep in the Lüneburg woods of northern Germany. It belonged to forest ranger Heinz Lemke. Lemke was a right-wing activist with extensive contacts in the German neo-Nazi scene. It was later revealed that the East German Secret Service, the Stasi, had pinpointed the exact location of transmitters used by the West German stay-behind groups. One of them was traced to Lüneburg, very close to Lemke's home and the sites where the hidden weapons were found.
Weapons caches such as these were in the remit of a European strategy. That much is proven. But if you were then to investigate how much Lemke had to do with all this, to what extent he had weapons and explosives at his disposal, and to what extent these were similar or identical to the explosives used in the Oktoberfest attack, such an investigation would yield results.
After his arrest, Lemke told investigators about the existence of a further 30 arms caches. He also said he was prepared to reveal his backers. But before he could deliver his testimony, he was found dead, hanging from the ceiling of his prison cell. His death provides a chilling link to the Brabant killings in Belgium. Evidence there also points to a link with a paramilitary organization. Police Commissioner Eddie Vos has been investigating the Brabant killings for many years.
We found out that there was a specific modus operandi, and that each person in the gang had his role. There was one guy that started shooting right away, and the way he fired and the way he positioned himself made me think of someone who has been trained in how to handle a gun.
In 1990, a Belgian parliamentary report concluded that the killers must have been members or former members of the security forces, right-wing extremists who enjoyed a high level of protection.
The Brabant killers were from a certain elite, and they were guaranteed impunity.
When a commission of inquiry tried to establish concrete links to the Belgian stay-behind army, SDRA-8, the head of the military secret service refused to disclose the names of the stay-behind soldiers. Evidence was found of a link to a neo-Nazi network called Westland New Post, or WNP. Their leader, Paul Latinus, confirmed that he had been asked to assemble a group of anti-communist paramilitaries. He refused to say who had ordered the mission, but he later claimed that he had been in the pay of US Secret Services.
There were many similarities between the stay-behind network and the network created by WNP. There were a number of soldiers and ex-soldiers in the WNP who believed they were working for the state, or considered themselves agents of the state.
Shortly after the last of the Brabant massacres, Latinus was arrested. But before he could talk, like Lemke in Germany, he was found dead in his prison cell, with a telephone cord around his neck. But why would secret right-wing armies terrorize peaceful countries like Belgium, Germany and Italy in the heart of Western Europe? The answer lay in a shift in Cold War thinking. The end of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought a kind of stability to the Cold War. A conventional Soviet invasion of Western Europe no longer seemed likely in the face of a stalemate in which East and West held each other in check with nuclear missiles. America was now determined to build up and expand its bases in Europe, and Italy was a key site. But Italian politics were unstable. The left was still gaining ground and had the potential to upset Washington's plans. Richard Gardner worked in Italy on behalf of various US administrations for over 20 years.
Italy was a key element in the southern flank of NATO, and the Communist Party of Italy opposed every practical measure to strengthen NATO. So there was concrete evidence that Italy could not be a good NATO ally if the communists took control.
The nuclear stalemate and the rise of domestic communism saw the purpose of the stay-behind armies revised.